Good morning. Today I'm going to talk very briefly about the myths and some misunderstanding about zirconia. Zirconia came into the marketplace like a bull out of a china shop, and we had very little understanding of the material to begin with. And some things were said about zirconia that still that weren't exactly true. However, they still linger. So what we're basically going to talk about is the nature of zirconia and the consequences of the important zirconia properties for dental restorations. Now, the zirconia composition itself is actually very simple, and it's mostly the ZrO2 is called zirconia, HFO2 is hafnia, that's a sister material to zirconia. And sometimes nature doesn't allow products to be separated from each other, and these two are bonded together. Hafnia has no place with regard to affecting the properties, mechanical or translucent. It's just there, and generally you can't reduce it below 2% of weight. And then, of course, we have the yttria. The yttria stabilizes the material, and we're going to talk more about what that means. But this is it. This is it. So with regard to the composition of the material, as opposed to dental alloys or dental porcelain, where when you wanted to change the properties of the material, you needed to modify the composition, this is very different. Here, the properties of the material are determined by how the powder was originally fabricated. And that goes way back into the manufacturing area. And that is very important for you because how that is done will determine the translucency and the strength that you wind up with. Now, zirconia has three crystalline forms. Now, I'm sure everyone has seen all of this before. However, I just want to review it because I have a couple of points to make about it. So at high temperatures, the zirconia is a cubic zirconia. And we're familiar with that years ago with regard to a substitute for diamonds. Zirconia has a brilliance second only to diamond. And the same thing with the hardness. The hardness is second only to diamond. And it's extremely pretty, but the material is very, very weak, very weak. As you lower in temperature, then it turns into this tetragonal zirconia. Now you see the structure is actually changing. So it's actually moving. The atoms are actually moving. And this intermediate form of zirconia, this is the most favored type of zirconia. This is tetragonal, and this is very, very strong. And this is what was desired for the initial medical application for hip implant joints, the little ball socket that went into a hip implant. And this is why they chose it, because when you add yttria to the zirconia, it becomes extremely strong in this form. However, at lower temperatures, it deteriorates into this very distorted monoclinic form. And there's actually a puff-up that happens where the volume increases. And that volume increase causes the material to fracture. That's called a transformation. And that transformation is what we experience when the doctor says, hey, I tried to adjust a cusp and I cracked it. Or you try and handle a sintered porcelain, you try and get on the sintered zirconia rather, you try and get an abrasure using a diamond disc, an abrasure a little open, an abrasure a little better, and you put a diamond disc in the sintered zirconia, and bingo, you wind up with 2 braces rather than 1. Okay. Now zirconia, as I just said, is crystalline, and that's very different than dental porcelain. And that has a substantial impact on the items that we were used to handling on dental porcelain. Things like etching the porcelain, any type of bonding to the porcelain. They can't chemically bond to zirconia. And you can't etch zirconia the same way, in the same way you do the regular dental porcelain. So it's a glass. It's not a glass like the dental porcelain is, and because of that, there are things that we've done with dental porcelain that we want to do with zirconia, but it doesn't work out quite the same way. Now, when you add yttria to zirconia, you stabilize this tetragonal form. And remember, that's a strong form. That's what we want to do. However, we don't add a lot for the dental porcelain, the dental zirconia. The dental zirconia stays in this area, and this is where we work in. However, notice that there's this green field here. That's the monoclinic field. So that means that anytime we add energy to the system, it has a danger of going into that monoclinic form. And when that happens, that's when we get our fractures. So how do we add energy? You put a diamond disc against it. The zirconia doesn't conduct heat very well. So it's going to concentrate the heat at the point of where that diamond disc hits the material, and it's going to absorb it, and it's going to transform into the monoclinic form, because the monoclinic form is more stable. Everything goes to its more stable form. And for all of our dental zirconias, the more stable form is monoclinic. So any opportunity that material has to change, it's going to take it. And when it does, it's going to expand in volume. Just like in your, when you have an ice tray, you put the water in the ice tray, you take it out after it's frozen, and look, the ice cubes are larger than what the water volume was. The same thing with the zirconia. You start off with a tetragonal form, nice and stable, but if you put too much energy into it, it transforms to monoclinic, and it grows almost 7%. That just breaks the whole thing apart. The cracks, by the way, travel at the speed of sound. So there's no such thing as healing the crack. Okay, so zirconia is very inert. That means it's very biocompatible. That's fantastic for the patient. We don't have to worry about allergies. We don't have to worry about any type of contact dermatitis, none of that. If you have a dentist and the dentist says, hey, you know, I put this zirconia, I cemented the zirconia in the patient, and the patient had a reaction. You tell the dentist they had a reaction to the cement. They don't have a reaction to the zirconia, okay? And if you want me to tell the dentist that, I'll do that too. Okay, so zirconia is very inert. That's good, and that's bad. Why is that bad? Because we've developed a whole bunch of things to do with zirconia, with dental porcelain, that we can't do with zirconia. Zirconia cannot be etched. Zirconia cracks cannot be healed. I heard of this one seminar where a person was telling dental technicians that if they fire the zirconia at like 200 or 300 degrees, it's going to heal the cracks. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. There's no such thing. Zirconia chips can't be repaired. You know that yourself. I mean, if you had a porcelain fused to metal bridge and you accidentally whacked the central, and you could just rebuild it again. You can't do that with zirconia. You start all over again. Okay? Zirconia has very poor adherence with porcelain. That's one of the main reasons why when zirconia was first introduced, it was opaque. You needed to put porcelain on top of it. And it had a clinical failure rate of almost 25%. And the reason why it failed so many times clinically is because of the design of the porcelain on the zirconia. People tried to design the porcelain on the zirconia the same way they did porcelain fused to metal. The difference is that there's no chemical bond between the porcelain and the zirconia. There is a chemical bond between the porcelain and the metal. The zirconia is inelastic. The metal is flexible. So any stress that's applied to the porcelain, on a porcelain fused to metal, the metal is able to absorb it and nothing happens. It stays stable. That doesn't happen with zirconia. If you design the porcelain incorrectly and that porcelain is required to take a stress, it's going to crack. And bonding is questionable, and we're going to talk about that. And these gentlemen are going to talk about that as well. Okay. Now, let's talk about the chemical durability of zirconia. Zirconia is up at the top. So this is as sintered. This is with lactic acid for 30 days at 60 degrees. This is Emax, and this is a resin. You see the resin gets very nicely etched. The Emax gets very nicely etched. The zirconia laughs at it. Saline for 30 days at 90 degrees, okay? Now, none of us are going to be 30 days at 90 degrees. However, look at that. There's a resin, there's an Emax, and zirconia laughs at it. Potassium hydroxide, okay? 30 days at 60 degrees. I mean, it'll burn a hole through your skin. Okay? The resin, Emax, beautiful etch, zirconia laughs at it, okay? Put it in an autoclave for 40 hours at 134 degrees C, okay? This is a very bad situation for any type of material that's going to absorb water. And here you have the resin. The resin has very deep holes in it. The Emax is nicely crystalline, and you can see all the grain boundaries. Zirconia laughs at it. Okay? So zirconia chemical durability is unsurpassed. But what does that mean? That means you can't do what you wanted to do with it as you handle porcelain. Zirconia is second only to diamond in hardness. And everyone was aware, oh, this is so hard, it's going to wear away the natural dentition. No. The hardness does not wear away dental technician. Roughness wears away dental technician. So here you have a study that was done, a monolithic zirconia with the glaze, polished, porcelain fused to metal, and lithium disilicate. Okay? And there's no statistical difference between the outer two or the inner two. So you have zirconia with glaze has a significant amount of loss. Zirconia just polished, half that. Why? Because the glaze really isn't chemically bonded to the zirconia. The glaze is just on the surface with a surface surfactant effect so that it can be ground off. And what happens when you grind porcelain off? It becomes rough. And once it becomes rough, you start getting wear. If you just polish the zirconia, you're not going to get that wear. That's it. It's that simple. Okay. Now, Gordon Christensen, a couple of years ago, came out with 5 errors that dentists make handling zirconia, and I wanted to remind you of 2. Number 1, if you have a dentist that says, hey, these zirconia crowns don't keep from coming off, he's probably using a silane-only primer, and they don't work on zirconia. They work on porcelain fused to metal, but they don't work on zirconia. You need to use a primer that contains this MDP chemical in order to get rid of any of the phosphates in the saliva. He also said improper use of cements. You have to, if you have a prep that's less than 4 millimeters, you need to use a self-adhesive resin, cement. That's it. So if you have this situation, you could refer back to Gordon Christensen, and generally the dentist will accept what Gordon says. Now, zirconia is a very poor conductor of heat, and that's fantastic for the patient. You're not going to have any hot or cold sensitivity at all. However, for us, it's a problem. Why? There's no indication of overheating when you're contouring. So if you're trying to contouring a sintered piece, you're going to hold it in your hand. Oh, I'm going to handle it just like I did a PFM. If it gets too hot, I'll feel it. You're never going to feel it with zirconia. Never. It doesn't get hot. Minor contouring and adjustments, like what the dentist needs to do in case the design is off a little bit, must be made with copious amounts of water. So when they put that burr on there, they have to have the water going. And hard tools like carbides or diamond discs cannot be used on sintered zirconia. They concentrate the heat, forcing the zirconia to transform, resulting in fractures. Now, one of the things that was said about zirconia, it has this fantastic property called transformation toughening. And it was hard to say no to that initially because not a lot of studies were done. And they were relying upon studies that were done on previous types of zirconia that were used in industry. And what does that mean? That means that transformation that I just told you about, it pops up the structure a little bit, and if you get a crack, the structure pops up and it stops the crack. Well, that happens on pieces that are like this big, okay? We don't make teeth that's this big. And the other thing is the composition where it works. Here is 2 mole percent yttria, and this is what's called transformation toughening. So here, it starts to crack, but the crack slows down. Slows down. And the crack extension can go pretty far, but it doesn't fracture, it doesn't break. So there's a crack in there, but it doesn't break, okay? Now here's our zirconia. This is what we started with, 3Y. And 4Y and 5Y are even worse. Here's our zirconia. There's a dental zirconia. So here you put a stress on it and it breaks immediately. Okay? That's it. So there's no such thing as transformation toughening. In the dental zirconias that takes place. So how it's phrased is very important. Does zirconia have transformation toughening? Yes, but not the kinds that we use. Okay? And here we have the typical type of fractures that we get back from dentists, where they try to adjust a contact and they didn't use a lot of water. Okay. So again, this is what I spoke about with regard to if you have a normal mill, you're not going to get a sharp embrasure. You try and put it in with a diamond disc and it cracks. Now, as I said before, you could have the same composition of zirconia and you have very different optical properties because the zirconia powder was made differently. Here we have 2 compositions, and you can see the top one that is nowhere near as translucent as the bottom one. Okay. That's one of my R&D failures. Okay. Now the other thing, I heard that there's a group of dentists, there's seminars given to dentists where there's a group of dentists that are saying that they should use 3Y zirconia rather than 4Y zirconia. However, the strength of 4Y zirconia is just as strong, if not stronger, than 3Y zirconia, depending on the sintering temperature and also the material that's used. Okay. Thank you very much.
I don't know what kind of luck that is to follow Paul. This is kind of a mean joke now that I see the landscape, how this is laying out, but that's just great stuff. I love it. I honestly love it. So for me, right, and I'm used to kind of teaching labs and helping labs kind of distill things down, right? And I'm a picture book guy. Like, I'm not going to read lots of big novels. I need books with pictures. So I really like to try to simplify things, and sometimes I oversimplify it, which is going to frustrate Paul to no end. But I do try to help clear up the landscape a little bit. So zirconia today, we're seeing lots of new zirconias hit the market. We're getting flooded with new zirconias. And right now, we're getting flooded with a ton of new zirconias that are multi-translucent zirconias. Okay, the term multi-layer has usually been utilized for zirconias that are multi-layers of color, but it's the same translucency or the same Y. So it's the same type of zirconia, but it's multi-layers of color. Okay, so it's one zirconia, multi-layers of color. Now we have multi-translucent zirconias hitting the market, which is giving us a whole new dynamic, right? It's very exciting. For someone like me, this is exciting because in the end, I have to sell a product. And I know that I have to achieve a certain aesthetic to make my doctors and patients happy. So if I have a multi-translucent zirconia, it's going to give me better light performance, and therefore I'm going to have to do a little less work to get there. Versus a zirconia that is multicolor but one translucency, I know I'm going to have to do X amount of work to get me to my end goal. Right? So when we see these multi-translucent zirconias hit the market, it's like, yes, exciting. It's going to save me X amount of time. I don't know what that is, and it may be different for every technician, but it's going to save me time. It's not going to do the work for me. It's just going to get me closer to the end goal. So we're very excited about this. But even though multi-translucent zirconia is wonderful, it's going to get us a step closer, it's still not nature. Right? That's the gap we have to make up. And depending on how you run your business and your clientele, you're going to see some different things, right? Now we have products on the market like MetE, right? And they kind of coin that I don't need translucency. I can make translucency out of thin air. And really, end of the day, it doesn't matter what you use. Stain is opaque, right? And wonderful products like Mio, they're wonderful products, but it's no different than the Roadrunner painting a tunnel on the side of a mountain for the coyote you run into. It's fake translucency, right? It's not real translucency, it's fake translucency. So this is a test we would do with our students to help them understand ceramics and help them understand that stain is opaque, so don't go overkill with it, right? And so you can see no matter what you use, one of those is Mio, one of those is another stain system, and you can see how, look, the way light reacts to it, it's just opaque. It's just opaque, okay? And we use that to our advantage, but we don't use that in replace of real translucency, right? So those are some things we cover, and with the different courses I put on, those are some of the things we kind of tackle is like, okay, how do we get materials from where they are now to the patient as efficiently as possible, right? I don't need to get my peacock feathers out and fly around the room. It's just I want to get from point A to B as efficiently as possible and make my doctors happy, make the patients happy. That's it, right? And there's different ways to do that. So that's the first thing I look at when I evaluate materials, is how much time is it going to save me by the aesthetic advantage it has. Now I'm going to look at the mechanical stability, and this is what is very interesting and almost a little disconcerting that I'm seeing this from these companies that are giving us these multi-Y, multi-translucent zirconias. Now there's two different ways of really combining these, right? There's a layered way where essentially you're stacking these layers on top of each other, these different Ys, and you're just hoping that they'll work out in the end, and that's what you see on the left up here. Or you have the gradient Y, which is a product like Prime, across the room, sorry Argen, but a product like Prime, where they have a little bit of a different way of processing it to make it a little more cohesive. So it's not an aesthetic advantage, it's giving it a little bit of a mechanical advantage. The way I did these tests is essentially I cut a bunch of blocks up, ordered a bunch of blocks myself, cut them up, and because I like food, I kind of simulate them to like cheese sticks, right? So about a cheese stick size, right? It's 16 millimeters. And essentially you lay it on its side to center it on a very flat surface. Now I lay it on its side because I know I want to see distortion and how much there is. I don't want to have the weight of the zirconia bend it like this, so I put it on its side. So if it bends either way, it's bending kind of like a fish through water, right? It's not having gravity because zirconia is very heavy and it kind of gets a little pliable, almost like melted candy. Again, I'm fat, right? I like food. And so I'm taking that equation out. So here you can see with perfectly stable materials, you have like Argen HD Plus. It's an all 4Y material, right, Paul? Yes? Okay. It's all 4Y material. All 4Y material, right? Very good material. Everyone knows it. Everyone loves it. It's the same zirconia all the way throughout. So of course it's going to be stable. No problem. Then you have a product, these newer translucent, multi-translucent zirconias out there like Prime, right? Which surprisingly, it's stable. That's a tough thing to do, as you're going to see here. Even when you get into Prime aesthetic, you can see it start to move and start to be less stable. This concerns me less because it is a 4Y to 5Y, or medium to high trans, or medium strength to low strength, knowing that I'm only going to use this material in small bridges or single units anyways. So I'm not really concerned about the amount of strength that it has here or the amount of distortion I'm seeing. And the same thing with Ivoclar MT Multi was kind of the first generation where it too was just layered zirconia on top of the other, layered Ys. Now look at the competitor. This is where they actually borrowed their gradient technology from, right? Surprising. We're seeing this bending again. Now you're seeing this bending because essentially each of the Ys, or each of the types of translucent zirconia, center at different times. Depending on their chemical composition, how they actually made them, they will center. So some will bend up, some will bend down, right? I have them placed like this so you have the light through, you have a very easy image. Again, I like picture books. I really like them, right?
Are you taking these photos?
Yes.
Nice.
Yes, so these are mine. So any of these companies can come find me. I have lots of guns, not a problem. Okay. Okay, so Upsera, very popular product. Again, this is actually a very pretty product and a very hot product. This is actually a product that a lab locally came and started utilizing this because they're like, I like the way this looks better. Other labs are saying they're having success with it. Guess what? They reached out to me. They're having a bunch of breakages. Unexplained, out of the blue. I'm like, well, yeah, it's not stable. It's wanting to literally rip itself apart, right? Because the Ys are not centering at the same time. So you start doing big stuff with it, it's ripping itself apart. This is where these companies are disturbing me, is because they're not being very honest. right? They know this and they should say, hey, look, don't do big stuff with this. It's really pretty. Don't do big stuff with it, right? Bloomdom, Alien, everyone's kind of jumping on this bandwagon. You're seeing this, it's very common. And even Katana, right? A company I highly respect. So here's the deal. When you have materials like this, it doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean don't use them. Use them appropriately. And we know these from the IFUs that we developed with MT Multi, which was a layered translucent zirconia, right? It's the same IFUs. Single units, great. Small bridges, great. Large stuff, woof, maybe not so great, right? Because you have possible CTE issues. You're going to have possible distortion. And you're going to have those mystery cracks that show up, right? We call it that tuning fork effect, where if you drop your zirconia bridge from like 2 inches on the table, you hear a loud ping, it's like bing, and then it's just in pieces. And you're like, what the heck happened, right? I was just throwing it across the room earlier and it was fine, right? It's that tension in the material and it's waiting to release. If you get it to the mouth and it's seated, you're fine. There's no need to fearmonger, it's fine. But those are the things we are concerned with, right? Versus if you have a material that is completely mechanically stable, then we have something you can do whatever you want with. You can layer it, stain it, handle it how you want. It's not bulletproof, right? But now you can kind of use it for everyone. You can honestly say use this in large mouth indications. So I equate this as to we need to make sure that we have the right zirconia for the right lab and the right person. Right? Not everyone's the same. Not everyone's going to work like I do, and I don't recommend it, right? I work a lot, and I'm not that rich, right? So I'm not doing something right? So you should work how you want to work, right? And you need to find the right zirconia for you. This is how I equate it to it. Hopefully we'll get a little volume. Let's skip past this. Not all zirconia is right for the right person. And pretty much we're going through we have this in golf, right? We have different types of clubs for different types of players. You have professional clubs for professional players because they can hit the same spot every time, right? They do exactly what they want. Tiger's equating it to the average handicap golfer. Let's see what he does. Right? And so pretty much you have your amateur and your pro golfers, right? And this is how I really talk to labs. I go in and I honestly evaluate with them and look at their milling room, right? Because if you're going to use a multi-translucent product, you really need to make sure you nest it perfectly. There's no room for error. You need to make sure you sinter it perfectly. They're more sensitive to sintering. No room for error, right? So you make any of those little mistakes and you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? And so that's where I might go into a lab and be like, look, no offense to you guys, but you're doing big stuff, you're running through things really fast, then maybe you need to stay away from these multi-translucent products and go to something that is more forgiving, like a single wide zirconia, like an HT plus multi, right, which is multicolor, very pretty, very versatile, less sensitive to how you nest it in the mill, right? You can throw them in there a lot faster. You may get some weird color gradients, but you need to, you got a little leeway there, but it's going to sinter very friendly. And then if you're a lab that's maybe just beginning and having an even harder time, right? Maybe you have a mill where the software isn't very advanced, then maybe you go back all the way to an HT plus. That's not even multicolor, because then you can throw it in the mill, however you want, right? Just to get it to mill, and it's going to sinter fine. So there's not one zirconia for everyone. You need to honestly just be like, what's going to work for us in our business, right? And then once we pick that, then it's how much work do I need to do to it to get it to the patient. So there's the summary, but I kind of took up a bunch of time. Pretty much I go by what is the light performance and what is mechanical stability. And hopefully I didn't upset Paul too much with all the summarizing, but thank you.
You really got to push this sucker. All right, what the hell did I say on this slide? All right. Designing with purpose, right? We got amazing materials that we get to work with today. But if you have a really poor design, how are you going to exploit the power of that material, right? I'm following two guys that know more about material science than just about anybody in this industry, and I'm one of those guys that like to make things simple. So what do you really need to know about zirconia? I can sum it up in two different things. And I pretty much suck at making graphs, but I can design things pretty good. So I slapped this together, and we're going to look at metrics here. There's 2 metrics. That's all you really need to know about, is translucency and strength, right? Let's simplify it. Let's look at the tables and really understand what we're trying to say. So if we're at the bottom of this scale, this may be 2 layers of Ceramco opaque on a doorknob versus a window pane all the way at the top. Here it's guaranteed to break in the mouth. Over there you can hit it with a hammer. This is essentially simple technology to think about zirconia. All of the mumbo jumbo that these guys share about zirconia, it's awesome to have that knowledge, but how is that going to make you a better technician in the lab? You have to trust the partners, trust the scientists that you're working with, invest in a product in a company that is going to stand behind the stuff that you're going to do, and learn how to make teeth look like teeth. We got great products. Design with purpose, guys. The purpose is to replicate nature and to utilize the technology that is going to overcome some of the challenges of the material that we have to work with on a daily basis. We all see things in our designs that we'd like to improve every single day. I try to inspire my technicians to really look at them. We, on a daily basis, have to use light to really understand what is happening to the surface of our restorations. If we can control the light, if you have good contour, if you have good surface texture, you can get away with having the hue be half a shade off a lot of times, because the way the light dances on the surface will refract in a manner that is different. That's what you want. You want the contours. So when you look at a design such as this, I like to look at it from multiple directions. I like to use the light in our CAD programs to really educate myself. I want to look at the incisal embrasures. I want to really plan for what's going to happen in this case. For years, we would take all of this power and use our hands to be able to put this detail into our work. We have these huge and powerful machines in our laboratory that can do amazing things if you tell it what to do. So start with your design. Start thinking about what the problems are with zirconia, the volumetric change, and how you're going to design to be able to overcome, over-design in some ways to really think about, is this groove going to matter? Can I mill this groove? And is this groove going to show up in a manner that is going to affect your final design? So again, contour, shape, the light, all make a difference in these materials. So how do we exploit that with zirconia? I suck at photography. I bought a macro camera and lens to try to learn how to do this, because I'm one of those guys that can't stand not knowing how to do something that other people can do well. And I struggled with it, and luckily I have one of my technicians here is Kate. She was a big help on this, and between her and I came up with some halfway decent photos that we can show here. So every single photo that I'm going to show is just of sintered zirconia. There's no stain, there's no glaze, there's no mechanical work except for cutting it out of the disc and slapping it on this model. Post-sinter. My goal when I design is try to minimize how much my technicians have to alter what my vision is for this design. It allows my technicians to be that much more effective if we can communicate effectively prior to getting to the point where we have to put the makeup on. Stain is ugly, guys. It gives the illusion of polychromatic aspect, but it kills your restorations more than anything else. They're great products. They let us do great stuff. But the material science of the zirconia that we have to work today, we can do amazing things with very simple colorants. All of this detail is done with the mill, not with hands, and is based upon my understanding of what my tool can accomplish. There's no better tool in your laboratory, other than your brain, to have consistency and use this stuff. So I want to empower you to look at these cases and think, is this a perfect representation of nature? Well, it has some really good surface texture, and what that's going to aid us with this particular material is it's going to allow the light to dance off the surface and not have a shiny flat surface. It's that contrast that Jed was talking about yesterday in his lecture. I really believe that if you look at contrast, it will aid you in understanding how to manipulate and boost translucency. It gives you the illusion of translucency. I'm not going to paint a gob of blue stain on this to try to get some sort of semblance of an incisal edge. My goal is to control the light. And these blown out photos in this room with this light doesn't do it justice. But if it's in your hand and you see it, it's amazing what you can overcome. And you can see the difference in every one of these photos just based on how the light is being taken by the flash. And if you know anything about taking flash photography with zirconia, the light just gets absorbed into the material. It's very hard to show the nuances of that material. But I like to say, look at your contour, look at your shape, look at your incisal embrasures, look at how you are putting that surface texture on to overcome some of the challenges of the material. If you understand the thickness of your material and you can control the pattern, you can have a uniformity to your light transmission, right? Well, there's no difference in the incisal edge position. Very nice contour gives very nice light refraction. Milling. Well, obviously, this is the first step to your success. If you're going to try to replicate your pattern, you have to understand what the mill is going to do, and you're nesting to maximize your ability to have that uniformity across the arch. If you're going to use a multi-layered material, you got to place it in the disc in a very specific manner to exploit the layers of that material. So many people say you can't mill zirconia clean. You're going to see chips and invariably have issues with that aspect. You can't mill a margin like this. I'm here to tell you, if you just understand what your tool can do and design within the tolerances of that tool and maintain the calibration on those tools, you can do some amazing things.
So you're not leaving a lip on the...
There's zero. That's zero offset. It's all controlled by the die that we made for this particular case. So it's... You'll see in the next photo here. So some of the crazy things that I've been playing with, because I'm a nut. I just do wacko stuff that probably will never work, but it's still fun to play with, is I like to think, what if I could do something with, a very high strength zirconia? Very chromatic zirconia, not multi-layer, just AT. And then mill a very precise offset to the facial to do a veneer. Very, very tight tolerance, very uniformed in thickness. If we really think about what a tooth is constructed of, we have a dentin layer and we have an enamel layer, right? And the enamel layer is super, super hard, and the dentin layer is a little soft, but it's super chromatic, and that enamel layer allows the light to transmit through that. Well, what if we could do something cool? What if we could mill a super thin, very, very, very precise veneer? And nest it in a disc like this that's going to exploit the most translucent part of the disc and be crazy. I love design. I love to manipulate it. I love to be able to control the offset of my patterns with precision. When I take two machined pieces and they go together and they fit like a glove with no slop to it, that's a great day for me. It's fun. So what if we could do that with zirconia? What if we could take a really precise design like this and mill a really highly translucent material? And these are all replicated parts. And come up with a way to see how chromatic that material can be. And what if we were going to do something really silly and start staining the internal of this actual core? Let's put some Mio on that. Very, very thin dimensions. Put some glaze on it. And then mill some veneers. And then bond the veneers together in the porcelain oven between two substrates. Could that work? Don't answer, Paul. we got a high-level meeting that's going, he doesn't know about it. And whether it's not going to work or not. The idea is, if you think about how to control the designs and what we can do today, we can do this on a natural tooth, right? If you have enough mechanical retention on anything, you're going to get a cursory adhesion. Is it going to be a bond? Well, of course not. But mechanically, we can lock this in. How many of you guys have done, zirconia veneers? Lots of people have, right? You can make it work with the right prep. Is it as strong as a bonded restoration? Well, no. But the material is stronger, right? So it has some advantages. It has more opacity. You can do some cool stuff with it. So think differently, guys. And you can see the precision that I can get off my mill between two restorations. These are just sintered, two different sintering cycles slapped together, and look at that marginal integrity. There's nothing that you can't do with CAD today by manipulating your designs to overcome the challenges and the aspects of what that material can do. I don't know about you, but that's a pretty damn good fit. Put some water in between there and we'd have that contact lens effect, and we'd be able to pull that color from the inside through the outside. Add some stain and glaze on that, and hey, maybe that's something that nobody will ever do. But I did it. All right, guys, so in conclusions, we have to realize and understand that each of the materials that we have to work with today have a window of opportunity for success to exploit the power of that material. And you got to play with some of this stuff to really know what you're going to like the most. Sticking with the instruction for use and the indicated use for the product is super important. And I just broke everything. But that's me. Contour, surface texture. I can't tell you enough on how much this can take an average restoration and bullet up to the nth degree. Everything is based on that contour and surface texture and luster of your material to match nature. It really makes a huge difference. I'm fortunate. Most of my stuff that I do in my laboratory is full arch. It's considerably easier to match that in the mouth because I got a full arch of material. The contour and shape and all the things are all the same things, but with single units, that contour surface texture is everything. Managing your design will only really matter if you can really figure out how to utilize your tools to replicate the pattern. So guys, please, any questions you have, we're here for you. We'd love to answer it. I'm thrilled to be able to share this stage with two guys that I respect greatly. They're amazing people, so let's open it up to some questions and answers. Yes, sir.
Those sort of dome structures that you did with the no margin reinforcement.
Yeah.
What did you mill those? What machine did you mill those?
PM7.
Can you repeat maybe for the group?
Yeah, he was asking what machine I used to mill that restoration. It was Ivoclar's PM7.
So you're taking the default offsets and minimizing everything so you don't have to wheel it back?
Yeah, there's the minimalist that the actual CAD software will allow me is that 0.1 for the margin line offset, and then I minimize everything else. The way it works is because I'm being very precise in my offset inside a 3 shape to separate the pattern. You got to realize that if you're using this as an anatomical cutback crown inside a 3 shape, there's some minimal properties that it will produce. And then I break the rules.
I've seen that a lot, like people milling without an offset, but then I guess old school thought was like, oh, you need that for the chipping, but then my friends are saying I've been doing it for years without chipping.
So when you're doing it on a controlled prep, if you're doing it on, say, a custom abutment, well, you can design your draft angle and your margin radius to be specific to it. So now you have the thickness of your margin that's managed at that particular point. That extended angle, or what we call the margin line offset, that thickness to it, can be next to nothing at that point because it's supported by the whole rest of the product. Still have to have sharp tools. Still have to have a good zirconia. I'm telling you, I've milled some softer stuff that just doesn't hold up. Come on.
Questions? Please raise your hand. We want to have you do it through the microphone so we can capture the question. But
That's a good idea.
what is on your mind? As you look at the future, so the three of you, first off, thank you for spending your time with us and sharing your experience. You look at the future of zirconia. How much of it is the substance of zirconia, the properties of zirconia, improving versus equipment and design improving as you look at the future aspects of what it would be in the next 3 to 5 years?
I don't know what the hell's coming, so it's kind of hard to answer. But what I can tell you is I've seen a huge shift in the quality of restorations that are being done. I think that as digital becomes the mainstay and people are understanding how to exploit the tools, people are getting better. There's still a frustration level. I think that there's plenty of people out there that are looking for the easy button, and the easy button consists of time. You have to put in the man hours to understand what the software can do well and what it struggles with, and then overcome. But as far as material science goes, these guys know way more of that. What I try to do, and some of the most frustrating parts of my career, is the iterations of zirconia. We'll master one to the point where we are thrilled with what we can produce with it. And then you guys make something else. And then I got to learn that one all over. And the advent of shaded and multi-layer and now multi-Y, well, all of those have had a marginal impact on aesthetics. It's great. It's improving every single version of it.
Sure.
And what's next? Who knows?
Jed, what's your perspective?
I have a question.
May
For
we-
layering and glazing, high temperature layering or low fusing, which one?
So that's a Jed question right there.
Well, high temperature glazing.
Like a Noritake high temperature or like a add-on there?
He's talking about glaze.
No.
Yeah. Correction, adding.
Yeah, well, I mean, in general speaking, I mean, the nature of higher fusing ceramics in general, whether it's glaze or as you get into the ceramics, the higher the fusing, generally speaking, you'll see a little more durability and a little more strength, and you'll get a little better kind of mechanical fusion to your restoration underneath. The downside to it is it's not as compatible with other materials, right? So the advantage to a lower fusing glaze or ceramic, as you're seeing with like Bellisi and the Emaxes out there, the nice advantage of those, you can kind of put them on everything, right? The downside is they're not as strong. So, but again, we're talking about strength within glaze, which we're talking about strength in something that's not strong to begin with. So,
I mean, the effect of the bridge cracking, and sometimes the say we go high temperature, a slow cool down, and you know.
Well, with zirconia, you always want to have slow cooling. The bigger the mass, the more important that is. Paul will tell you that aspect. He knows about some of the biggest failures of zirconia back in the day was all based upon, you know, not knowing how to fire the stuff and dropping the plate of the porcelain furnace too fast. So the more that we can control how it cools, because it doesn't transmit the heat as well. He's mentioned it in his part of his aspect. So slow cooling, especially in these huge mass items, that's why the firing programs for a full arch is so long, because you have to be able to control how it rises up and how it cools down. Isn't that right, Paul?
Correct.
Awesome, I got one right.
Well, John just made me think of this question. So does Argen have like I guess other companies have like a 345, 4 hours zirconia, and you're talking about the cooling process, but now he's showing the distortion on that. Do you have any experience on like a 4-hour sintering cycle for a full arch?
One, I wouldn't do it. I have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of arches now done with all kinds of different material. The HT Plus and HTML has been an amazing product for me. I long center everything for it for full arch. I just don't see the need. I'm not in an office, so what's 4 hours going to do for me? And the amount of electricity is nominal in my mind. Maybe over the long run it might make a difference, but for me, I can control it because I know this process. Somebody has to really hard sell me on heating up a huge mass of zirconia in a fast time to try to get to that position and then have it mature.
I think, I mean, especially on the top, I think if you're saying, can you do it? Yeah, you can do it. Is it going to be affected by it? Absolutely. So, I mean, from a mechanical standpoint, maybe there's some nuances, but technically it's going to center. Technically it's going to be the right size and everything if we're talking single units, right? But 4Y and 5Y zirconia, from my experience across all brands, all everything, it does not like speed. Okay, so even though it's going to center, it's going to get to the right shape, the look is not the same. The looks are dramatically affected, and every company that's come out and said, hey, we can do this, 45 minutes, 1 hour 30, whatever, it's the same. Yeah, almost a few months later, it'll be like, well, it's not the same. You can do it. The other programs are still good, you know? So it's always that mistake where it's like zirconia really does like certain things, and it's hard to kind of get away from that from my experience and what I've seen. So that's where I would kind of lean back to Paul, the genius who really knows. Yoda.
As I mentioned, and these gentlemen have mentioned, zirconia takes time. It does not conduct heat very well going up or coming down. In order to develop the shade, you need time at above 1,000 degrees C. Now, we had a client in the place that says, oh, I do everything in an hour. Hour? Yeah. If I want an A1, I buy an A2. I use an A2. If I want an A2, I use an A3. And what he says is correct. However, on bridge work, especially long span bridge work, we've recently had a case where a gentleman tried to do what you're talking about, 4 hours, and he got it out of his laboratory, and the dentist put it in the mouth, and 6 months later, ping, broke. 7 months later, bing, it broke. Yeah. So he sent back to us about 6 different 12 and 14 unit bridges because they weren't sintered properly. So you could get the outside to look okay, that's where the heat is, but the heat doesn't penetrate instantaneously throughout the entire bridge. And as the bridge gets bigger, as you know, it gets thicker. As it gets thicker, it takes longer to sinter properly. So you could get it to look okay, but it's not going to. You have a big problem with future fracture.
We need those photos for the next lecture, not 4 hours.
How about those extra bar they put? Okay, you have a full arc with
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you always put. Yeah, that's right.
this one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you have a support. Yeah, that's support, but molar to molar. Right.
I mean, essentially, my fastest program I've ever been able to achieve without the aesthetics really going south on me, in my opinion, right, is really about a 5-hour cycle. That's my fastest cycle, and that's in an S1 oven, which has a 0 mass style to it, right? There's no coffin, no beads. So if I'm doing more units, that's like for a single unit. Okay, I can get away with that, but if I'm putting more potatoes in the oven, it takes longer. Right? And so I go usually between a 6-hour cycle and a 12-hour cycle, depending on the mass going into the oven. That's much faster than that for me, and I see the aesthetics take a big hit, and so I'm out.
So yeah, we're working on a case currently. It's a single central, the thing that we all love to do the most, and it's screw retained. And we've been having an issue extraorally. It is absolutely perfect. Like some of the best work I thought I had done until it's screwed into place and it goes gray. Is it picking up tissue perhaps? Should I go to a 4Y? Like that's kind of the issue I'm having is I've got to start all over again. It'll be the third one, but I want to make sure the third one's the last one. And it's just, you know, everybody has that case in their career that just, you know, that's why I have no hair.
So what I think, so obviously the higher the Y, the more translucency you're going to have, and invariably translucency is going to be transferred in value. It'll bring the value down of the material. It gives you the illusion of translucency because light is transmitting through it in a manner. But what's the trade-off on that? It's gray, right? So oftentimes the translucency doesn't help you to match a shade. It really is a hindrance in a lot of ways. So it was very common back in the day, even with Emax, when we used to use the high translucency pressing ingot. There was a real challenge to not get a low value restoration because of that translucency. So oftentimes I will use a higher translucency or a higher chromatic, one shade heavier on that, and understand that if I'm going to have the dimension of the zirconia to overcome obviously the abutment as well, I can get away from some of that gray. The hard part, like you said, is when it's outside the mouth, you look at it and it looks like what you're supposed to hit, then there's some optics on inside the mouth that can do it. You got to think it, we're putting this in a dark hole, and the light is going to go in here in a very specific manner. That's why I say that that surface texture is everything for it. It can really brighten up or drop it down if you don't have the texture right.
The unfortunate thing about this case is the smoothest crown I have ever seen in my life. The patient's natural tooth that we're matching, it is perfectly smooth. There is not an iota of texture in it.
There's a good diamond wheel that you can go right in there. And
What's the zirconia?
I've been using the HT plus multi-layer.
Yeah.
Okay,
on that
so
one. But
yeah.
you need to dial it back, go to
Yeah, so I mean, it's a pick your poison scenario, right? We have to block out the titanium base. We have to make sure we really block that from kicking light and throwing gray everywhere, right? But you also need to make sure you have a pretty tooth at the top, right? So this is that argument for a multi-translucent zirconia, where you can have the block and have the trans. Otherwise, you got to pick something that's opaque and overlay the top. Or in your case, you have something that's actually fairly translucent and really pretty. So you might want to think reverse, think more of a gold inlay, right? Like a buckle inlay on a gold crown, old school, and leave your monolithic everything, monolithic occlusion and everything, and actually lay opaque ceramic, rebuild the dentin part of that crown with actual ceramic.
okay.
And that way you can block it out that way, because you need to boost the opacity in the lower portion while keep maintaining that nice pretty edge. So the edge is probably right on.
or a really good way to do it, just don't do single centrals. It's a BOGO. You just do buy one, get one free.
Some of us don't have a choice.
What
Buy
shade
one,
is
get
it?
one free.
What shade is it?
It's a 1M1 basically, but it's,
Whoa, okay,
yeah,
okay. You may want to try a 3Y.
we'll show you a picture.
All right,
You may
let's
have,
show pictures then. So
you may have to
we're
go down to a
a
3Y.
little bit over, so thank you all for being here.
Okay.
Let's thank the panel. Thank you all for being here, and they'll be here.